Hi folks, welcome to video 3.1 for American government. And today we are starting our unit on the three branches of government. So in this video, we're going to be talking about the basics of Congress. So we're starting with the legislative branch, and the legislative branch is made up of Congress. So the goals for this video, we are going to explain the role of the legislative branch in our government. We're going to talk about some things called enumerated and implied powers. And we're going to give examples of legislative checks on the executive and judicial branches. So this unit is really all about separation of powers between the three branches and how they check one another. And then our third objective for this video is to categorize powers and responsibilities according to the branch of government that holds them. We're going to get into that obviously even more as we get into this unit, but really just starting out, what exactly are the responsibilities of Congress? Okay, so basics of Congress here, simply what is Congress? Something to know is that we are currently in the 116th Congress. So there is a new session of Congress every 2 years. So we are currently in the 116th. We will soon be in the 117th. Okay. Congress is what we call a bicameral legislature. Bicameral is a word that you'll see quite a bit. And what that means is that we have a Congress that is made up of two separate, distinct bodies. So bi is like a prefix for two. So that means we have two pieces of our legislative branch. So that is split into the House and the Senate. And what this was ultimately the purpose of this was to allow for fair and equal representation of the states. So both of these parts, both of these distinct houses are equal, but the way that they're set up is different, and we'll talk about that. But we have the Senate as one of these pieces. And that's the more elite group. A lot of people consider the Senate to be the millionaires club. And then the House of Representatives. And the House of Representatives is seen as closer to the people because they were the ones originally elected by the people. And they represent a smaller area known as a district, whereas the Senate represents a state. So they're further away from the people, so to speak. Now, Congress itself is made up of 535 voting members. 100 of those members come from the Senate. So you're going to need to associate 100 with the Senate. And how we arrive at that 100 is that each state has two senators. And it is written in the Constitution that that is the number given to each state. If you remember back to when we were talking about the Articles of Confederation and the Constitutional Convention and that New Jersey plan, this should sound familiar. Smaller states wanted representation to be equal per state, and that is how we arrived at the Senate. And then we have the House of Representatives. This is made up of 435 members, so it's much, much larger, and it's based on population. So this we arrived at from the Virginia plan during the convention because bigger states wanted population to be proportionate, meaning if you were a bigger state with more people, you would have more say in government. So I want to talk about a little bit more the differences between the House and the Senate and get into what this bicameralism looks like. So the House of Representatives, something to note first is that members represent a district. And that is not necessarily a city or state. It's even smaller. It's really just a small geographic area. And we'll talk about districts in another video. They're not necessarily square, as we'll see if you've ever heard of something called gerrymandering, but they represent a small amount of people compared to a senator. Now, as we've said, there are 435 members of the House, and this number itself doesn't change. Okay, there are always 435 members. However, the number of representatives given to each state is adjusted every 10 years because it's based on population. So as populations change, right, Ohio might gain or lose members of its population. We might gain or lose representatives in the House. And the reason it's every 10 years is because that's when we conduct the census. You might have seen signs about taking the census this year. There was one that went out in 2020. That's part of what goes into determining membership in the House. The House has 2-year terms. So we kind of talked about with term limits. There are no term limits in Congress. So a representative is in office for 2 years. However, they can run over and over and over. And debates really come into play when it comes to, making a law. But one thing to note about the House is that debates are limited because of the House's size. The House is huge. There are 435 people to get to talk about bills and potential laws. That would take forever if there weren't strict limits and guidelines on how to debate. Okay. Now, to be a member of the House of Representatives, you have to be at least 25 and be a citizen for at least 7 years prior to being elected. Now, one thing to note is that you don't have to live in your district. You don't have to live as a representative in that district itself. Okay. Now, on the flip side of things, we have the Senate. Okay, the Senate represents a state. Okay, so the Senate represents a much larger area and a much larger population than a representative does. We've already said that the Senate is 100 members, determined by the Constitution. It is outlined in the Constitution how many senators there are, how many there are per state. That does not change like it does in the House of Representatives. Senators, unlike the House of Representatives, serve 6-year terms. So they have much longer terms versus the House. However, remember, once their 6 years are up, senators can run as many times as they would like. There are no term limits for the Senate. And another key difference is that debate in the Senate is unlimited. Now, there are some restrictions, and we'll talk about a filibuster here in a second. But the Senate is much smaller. So you can have more unstructured debate, and filibusters, as we'll talk about, kind of add to that unlimited debate. To be a senator, you have to be a little bit older, so 30 years old to be a senator, and be a citizen for at least 9 years. Now, you do have to live in the state that you represent as a senator, unlike the House. So to go back to a filibuster, honestly, I will make myself a note to show you guys what a filibuster looks like in class when we get to this point. They're very interesting because really what a filibuster is, it's talking a bill to death. It is simply standing in front of the Senate, and a senator will not stop talking until the Senate agrees to delay action on a bill or potential law. Now, fun fact, the topic of conversation doesn't even have to be about the bill. It can be literally anything. As long as they don't stop talking, that is considered okay conversation. So that's kind of what we mean when we say unlimited debate. There are less rules. So you're definitely going to want to make sure that you have down on your notes that a filibuster's purpose really is to delay action on a bill to prevent it from being voted on. So next, let's talk about demographics of Congress. So when we're talking about demographics, we're talking about the composition of Congress, right? Men versus women, race, sex, age. So what we find is that Congress is typically not representative of the American public as a whole. The average member of Congress is white, male, and in their mid-50s. Now, the 116th Congress is the most diverse Congress that there has ever been. We've had the most women, we have the most minorities in Congress today. However, on average, that is not the case. Most congressmen and congresspeople are married with children. Most are Christian, and most come from some sort of law background or political background prior to becoming a member of Congress, whether that's a mayor, a governor, something like that. As you can see kind of from this picture, this is an outdated picture, and we are moving in the right direction, having it representative of the public. We still have a long way to go. So what does Congress do? Specifically, separation of powers in this particular slide. You've heard this hopefully since like elementary school, but the legislative branch makes the law, right? Legislation is a law. That's what that means. So that is really the primary focus of the legislative branch. In the Constitution, Congress is given what we call enumerated powers. These are powers that are listed in the Constitution, right? We talked about that with federalism. Enumerated powers are given to the national government. A lot of those go to Congress. For example, regulating commerce between states and with foreign countries. So that's trade. Issuing taxes is a responsibility of Congress. The elastic clause is what establishes the implied powers of Congress. So we'll talk about that in our next video. And then also Congress is what declares war in our government. So Congress has to approve a formal declaration of war. So then how does Congress check other branches? We will get into this and repeat a lot of this as we go through our branches, but as a whole, on a broad overview, the legislative branch can check the executive branch, the president, a couple of ways. One, they can impeach. That is a huge responsibility of Congress, is impeachment. And we'll talk about that process. They can also vote to override a veto that the president may enact on a bill. Veto means to reject. So they can override that rejection with 2/3 of a vote. And Congress also approves or denies treaties that the president may negotiate with other countries and foreign leaders. Now, on the judicial branch, Congress can impeach a justice if they violate the Constitution or a law. They can confirm judicial appointments that are made by the president. So to become a member on the Supreme Court, as we're seeing right now, to replace Ruth Bader Ginsburg, the president nominates a justice that then has to go through Congress before that person can be put onto the Supreme Court. And then if Congress doesn't like the way that the judicial branch interprets a law, they can amend the Constitution or pass another law that kind of overrides that ruling. Right? And we will talk about most of these things in a little bit more depth. But like I said, as a broad overview, that's how Congress checks the other branches of government. So remember, your learning objectives were to explain the role of the legislative branch in our government, give examples of how the legislative branch checks the executive and judicial branches, and categorize powers and responsibilities according to the branch of government that holds them. So take a moment, go back if you need to, then answer the questions in Edpuzzle, and make sure that you do record those correct answers on your note sheet. And I will be circulating around the room, I'm sure, if you have any questions. So thanks for watching, guys, and I will talk to you soon. See ya.